Greetings. Now I'm going to start my presentation. First of all, I'm extremely thankful to Professor B.S. Yadav sir for moderating this session. Today we are going to discuss on infective endocarditis, and last year my senior Dr. Bharat Purandre took a very nice lecture, and I'm going to discuss and focus this year on culture-negative infective endocarditis. So these are my disclosures. I've been associated and have been on the advisory board of a few companies. So to begin with, we all know that infective endocarditis is one of the most challenging infectious diseases syndromes in the whole landscape of infectious diseases. And this is because this is avascular, the vegetation is avascular, where there is less penetration of the antibiotics. Besides, the bacteria are largely non-replicating and metabolically inactive. There is also host defenses, which impacts the killing of the bacteria by the antibiotics. And also, the bacteria are present in the high density, so some which has an inoculum effect, particularly for the beta-lactams as well as for the glycopeptides. So that is why to cure infective endocarditis, we need a therapy which is bactericidal. We need a prolonged therapy, and of course, preferably a parenteral therapy, at least in the beginning of the treatment. So for infective endocarditis, we all rely heavily on the blood cultures. In fact, this is one of the major criteria in the modified Dukes criteria. So for the diagnosis of infective endocarditis, blood cultures have to be sent in the appropriate volume. It's the volume which matters the most, and it's not the timing of the blood cultures. So ideally, it should be 3 sets of blood cultures, one set should be one aerobic and one anaerobic, with 10 ml in each blood culture bottle from 3 different veniculture sites before starting the antibiotic. And it should be taken half an hour apart, or it should be 2 sets 12 hours apart. To improve the sensitivity of the blood cultures, we can do subcultures, or we can keep them for prolonged incubation, as well as perhaps sometimes use microaphilitic blood culture bottles. But despite measures, there is a significant proportion of culture-negative infective endocarditis. The prior studies showed that the culture-negative infective endocarditis is probably somewhere between 5 to 10%. But there are so many recent literature which shows that the percentage of culture-negative infective endocarditis is much higher. And in fact, the global incidence of culture-negative infective endocarditis is variable. So this is a study from Algeria which showed that the percentage of culture-negative endocarditis goes to 56%. Similar rates are observed in South Africa, Pakistan. From France, the very large study showed that 79 of the 427 cases were culture-negative endocarditis, and in Slovakia it was somewhere around 40%. So it keeps on varying from country to country, and sometimes within the same country it will vary from center to center. So this was a study which was done by Dr. Subramanian et al. And published in 2010, where the culture-negative endocarditis comprised close to 77% of all the culture of all the infective endocarditis, which is a very large number. However, this was a study which was done in 2010, but with the advances in the blood culture techniques, definitely the culture negative cases have decreased, but they're still significant. So a study by Dr. Soman et al., which was published in 2018, it was an 8-year experience, and that showed that the culture negative infective endocarditis consisted close to 23% of all the infective endocarditis cases. A study from Apollo Chennai showed that 41% of all the endocarditis was culture negative, and in our experience at Medanta, the Medicity, culture negative endocarditis is close to 29%. So it's 53 cases of 151 were culture negative endocarditis. So it's a significant number, and that is why the focus today is culture negative infective endocarditis. And when we talk about culture negative infective endocarditis, traditionally it's the Hesse group of organisms which just flashes our mind. But the most common cause of culture negative infective endocarditis is prior antibiotic exposure. The prior antibiotics sterilizes or decreases the chances of isolation of infections due to streptococci. So there is impact with the prior antibiotic exposure is a drop in isolating the bacteria by close to 35 to 40%. And rarely, prior antibiotics may also decrease the chance of isolating the staphylococcus or the enterococci. It all depends upon which antibiotic has been used in what dose and for what duration. Then the other causes of culture negative infective endocarditis may include inadequate microbiological techniques or the inadequate volume in which the blood culture has been collected. Then, of course, we have the highly fastidious bacteria like the Hesychrope of organisms, as well as defective streptococci like the Gemella, Crynolicatella, Abiotrophica. With the current blood culture batting systems, the isolation of these organisms has been improved. In fact, they can be isolated with at least 5 days of incubation. So it's important to incubate them for a longer period, and so is it is for a certain bacteria like the Brucella as well as the non-tuberculous mycobacteria. Now, the other cause of culture negative infective endocarditis are the typical culture negative organisms, which are intracellular bacteria like the Bartonella, which is endemic in France. Then we have Coxiella burnetii, which is diagnosed predominantly by the serological assays. And then we have the Tropharima vibrilli, which is diagnosed by the PCR on the excised bag tissue. Other causes include the fungal endocarditis like caused by Candida as well as Aspergillus. So Candida can be isolated from the blood cultures, but as we know that even with 3 sets of blood cultures, the isolation of Candida is only 50%. So again, it can be a cause of culture negative endocarditis. The other causes include non-infective endocarditis, which are rare, but still may comprise close to 2.5%, and it may be related to vasculitis like lupus, Behçet's. Now, today we're going to discuss regarding how do we diagnose the culture negative endocarditis, what is the epidemiology of infective endocarditis, how should we choose the antibiotic choices, what are the various surgical indications, and of course discuss regarding the prophylaxis. So when we talk about the diagnosis, it all depends upon the history, clinical presentation, and we have to keep in mind the risk factors for the endocarditis per se. So these are the endocarditis has a variable presentation, and these are the various clinical as well as the lab features with which an endocarditis can present. Most common presentation is with fever, and as we can see, 80 to 90% is with fever. But remember, 10 to 20% cases may present without fever, and that's called euthermic infective endocarditis. Leukocytosis is seen only in 20 to 30% of the patients, and it's usually seen if there's infective endocarditis with staphylococcus or with enterococci or with a gram-negative bacteria. So as the clinical presentation of infective endocarditis is very variable, the suspected cases of infective endocarditis are classified as definite, possible, and rejected infective endocarditis as per the modified Dukes criteria. Now, this is a criteria which is sensitive as well as specific, and it's useful for the epidemiology clinical trials as well as for individual clinical management. So the major criteria includes the macrobiological criteria, but here for culture negative endocarditis, the cultures are completely negative. So it's the echocardiography and the minor criteria which becomes very important for the diagnosis of culture negative endocarditis. So echocardiography, in fact, is center in the diagnosis of culture negative endocarditis. And as we know, the transesophageal echocardiography has a much higher sensitivity of picking up the vegetations as well as for picking up the perivascular valvular extension or the abscesses. It's probably twice more sensitive in picking up the complications as well. So that is why In case the suspicion is very high, especially for prosthetic valve endocarditis, the suspicion is high, it's recommended to repeat the transesophageal echocardiography after 3 to 5 days if the initial echocardiography is negative. This is a change from the 2005 guidelines where they earlier had recommended that it could be repeated 7 days later. But having said that, the transthoracic is also important because it will help in the non-invasive monitoring of the vegetation size as well as the clinical complications which can happen during the course of therapy. We must always remember that there are certain false positive conditions which can mimic the vegetations like the thrombus, previous scarring, myxomatous changes, or even Lambert's excrescences. Now, coming to the minor criteria, which is also very important for the diagnosis of cultural negative endocarditis, and it predominantly includes the predisposing heart condition, predisposition, as well as fever, as well as a physical examination, which may pick up the vascular phenomena or the immunological phenomena based on the lab investigations. Now, modified Hughes criteria per se has a sensitivity of 70 to 80%, but in patients with cultural negative endocarditis, there are certain limitations as well, which are a little more. So that's why in the San Thomas modification of the Duke's criteria will help in improving the sensitivity by close to 10%. And this includes elevated ESR CRP, a new onset clubbing splenomegaly, as well as hematuria. There are certain new developments in the diagnosis of infective endocarditis, as we can see. So we have the imaging, which helps in the diagnosis. CT scan has a certain advantage, but has a limitation of radiation exposure. It's the MRI as well as MR angiography, which can be useful for predicting the silent strokes as well as the intracranial mycotic aneurysms, especially in patients who are undergoing surgery. And of course, PET-CT can also light up and detect the peripheral embolization as well as the extracardiac manifestations. So we also have a molecular sequencing which can help in predicting the blood culture negative endocarditis, especially the Bartonella species. Now, coming to the epidemiology of infective endocarditis, which is important to understand while we are choosing our antibiotic therapy. So, in the West, the most common cause of infective endocarditis is Staphylococcus aureus, and that's why most of the guidelines mention Staphylococcus as the first organism, and the focus is also on that. But the Indian epidemiology is very different, and this was one of the studies which we had presented in IDSA, and subsequently it was published in JAPI as well as a larger 8-year experience. So here, the microbiological profile of organisms with IE, the most common organism is Streptococcus species, followed by Enterococcus. We can see that there was no case of MRSA isolated at all, and the MSSA was only one case. Among the other culture positive cases, we had the HESIC group of organism, which was again just one case isolated. We had 5 cases of rapidly growing mycobacteria, which could have been missed in some other lab, but yes, this grows within 7 days and in the normal blood culture bottles as well. So rapidly growing mycobacteria is an emerging problem or a cause for infective endocarditis, and it's related to the prior intravascular stents, and also needs to be considered if a patient has undergone a PTCA or a angiography previously. Now, moving down south, this was one of the earlier studies which was done, and as we can see here, the most common cause of infective endocarditis was VGS group among the 23% of the culture positive cases. Again, a profile of infective endocarditis from Apollo Chennai has showed that the most common cause was the Viridans group of Streptococci, which consisted of 13%, followed by Enterococcus species. So they both are almost neck to neck. Again, Staphylococcus is not very common, and MRSA was just 3.3%. This again establishes that there is no need to empirically start vancomycin in all the patients with endocarditis. We have to really see whether there is a strong possibility of Staphylococcus aureus as a possible etiology or not. This was another data from the West, which showed that the most common organism is VGS, not much of Staph aureus again in this particular study. And this was the data which we had presented in SITSCON in 2015, 32 cases. The VGS and the enterococci were almost neck to neck with each other, most common causes. And again, MSSA and MRSA were not very common. As we can see here, the culture negative endocarditis definitely was the leading cause of the endocarditis, of the total endocarditis cases. And a larger data over the last 8 years again shows that the most common organism is VGS, followed by enterococci. Not much of MSSA and MRSA, as we can see, it's less than 8%. Again, the nutritionally variant streptococci like the granulicatella as well as A. biotrophica have been isolated with the current blood culture bacterial systems. As we can see, its culture negative endocarditis is 53 of the 151 cases, which is a very significant number. So when we deal with endocarditis, even when the cultures have been sent and we are waiting for the report and we want to initiate an empirical antibiotic therapy, it's important to identify the likely organism, and there are certain risk factors which can give a clue. So for example, risk factors like a recent dental procedure, dental hygiene, dental caries, that will give a clue towards VGS or a nutritionally variant streptococci. If a patient has got UTI, elderly, GI related problem, then it is related to the then there is strong possibility of VGS as well as enterococci and the nutritional variant strep. If there is a patient who has got skin and soft tissue infection with abscesses formation, thrombophlebitis, acute onset endocarditis, then Staph aureus needs to be considered. If there's any CVC, HD catheter, leukocytosis, then Staph aureus, MR cons, GNB, which includes anterior varices, pseudomonas, as well as malaria, have to be kept in mind. And in patients who have got constipation, or if there is a CA colon, there is a strong possibility of Streptococcus gallolyticus as well as NBS. Besides this, if their exposure to the farm animals and their products of conception, then Brucella, Coxiella burnetii. If there's ingestion of the unpasteurized milk, then Brucella and Coxiella burnetii needs to be considered. If this chronic alcoholism, exposure or contact with a human body louse, homeless shelters, then Bartonella. Again, with the cat contact or ownership, Bartonella Hensley has to be kept in mind. Travel history is also very, very important. Travel to Middle East will give a clue towards Brucella as the possible etiology, and North Africa will give a clue towards Bartonella quinjana. Occupational exposure to soil or farm animals will give a clue towards Tropharema bipili, and laboratory exposure to pathogens will give a clue towards histoplasmosis. Very important is the onset of the illness. If it's an acute onset infective endocarditis, then we must think of likely possibilities as Staph aureus, beta hemolytic streptococci, and aerobic GNB. And then we have to cover the organisms accordingly with probably vancomycin and meropenem if there is for the aerobic GNB. But if it's a subacute endocarditis, then the most common organism will be VGS, enterococci, NVS, Hasidrup, and these need to be covered in the Indian setting. Now, coming to the antibiotic choices, there are always few questions which cross our mind that what antibiotic needs to be given, what should be the combination, and what should be the duration. So when we talk about antibiotic choices, it's all about integration of information regarding various factors as we just discussed, that which is the likely organism, its susceptibility, which will be based on the epidemiology as well as the risk factors. What are the properties of the antibiotic, whether the antibiotic is cidal, static, for example, ampicillin is cidal for a susceptible VGS, but static for enterococci, and that is why combination therapy needs to be used. Characteristics of the patient, which includes whether the patient has got any allergy to the beta-lactams, in that case, alternative with vancomycin, end organ dysfunction, and of course, interaction with other concomitant medications. And of course, surgery or source control in case of complications are very, very important. So let's just quickly see a couple of cases. This is a patient who has got, who had undergone mitral valve replacement for a MS and presented with PUO, and he had the Streptococcus sanguis isolated from all the 3 blood cultures. The echo showed a vegetation, large vegetation with a severe MR. So this was a case of late onset prosthetic valve endocarditis because he presented to us somewhere in 2014. So with the Streptococcus sanguis, which is a VGS, we requested for a penicillin MIC, and that turned out to be sensitive with a pen MIC of less than 0.12. And with this penicillin MIC, this patient was treated with a therapy of ceftriaxone and gentamicin. So this is very important to know that what is the penicillin MIC, because we are seeing also an increasing resistance among the Viridans group of streptococci. In this particular study, which we had presented, among the streptococcus species, penicillin MIC was interpreted as per the AHA criteria in 6 of the 9 cases, and of these, 4 of them were intermediate and 2 were resistant. So wherever possible, if the isolate is available, the penicillin MICs need to be checked and the therapy will be decided accordingly. Now, this is another patient who has got who is a 35-year-old gentleman with diabetes. He had a single kidney, presented with PUO and vasculitis-like syndrome. His culture was positive with Enterococcus fecalis. There was a vegetation seen on the TTE with severe AR. And Enterococcus fecalis, whenever we see Enterococcus, look at the benzyl penicillin. If it is here, it is resistant. And subsequently look at the gentamicin, which is sensitive. So it's a non-HLAR strain. Now with this, what should be the other antibiotic option? So with this, whenever if it's benzyl penicillin resistant or ampicillin resistant, then we must know whether the resistance is because of the beta-lactamase production or it's because of the alteration in the penicillin binding protein, because this has implication on the choice of therapy. If there is alteration of the penicillin binding protein, then the choice of antibiotic could be vancomycin or daptomycin. But if it is because of the beta-lactamase production, which can be checked even with the automated systems or with the nitrocephin disc, then we can use a BLV-like combination of ampicillin sulbactam with gentamicin for treating this particular isolate. And in this particular patient, this was Enterococcus fecalis, which was beta-lactamase producer. So we treated this patient with a combination of ambisulbactam with gentamicin for 6 weeks. The combination of vancomycin with genta would be in fact static and nephrotoxic. And again, linezolid, which though is reported as susceptible here, will again be static for Enterococcus. It's not a good choice. The other alternative regime which can be used for Enterococcus fecalis is a double beta-lactam strategy of ampicillin and ceftriaxone, and this has a sidal synergistic activity, plus it's a non-nephrotoxic alternative. However, we need to just watch out for the drug fever. Now, coming to this particular case, which was a case of culture-negative infective endocarditis, and here we can see that this is a 54-year-old gentleman who had CLD. He had no prolonged antibiotic exposure, presented with PUO. He had a vegetation on the hand pulse, normal dental hygiene, had a WBC count of 4,000, and he was started on meropenem and teicoplanin and elsewhere. So how do we treat this patient? Should we continue with mero-teico or can we optimize the therapy? So it's important to know that which are the organisms which are likely in this patient. So here, the organisms which are likely are VGS, which is the most common organism for IE in India. Subsequently, this is an elderly patient with CLD, so enterococci and other organisms like nutritionally variant streptococci, Streptococcus galolyticus, as well as HSP group of organisms need to also be kept in mind. So to cover these bacteria, we can empirically start this patient on AMPI and ampicillin and gentamicin. But in many centers, in fact, ampicillin is not available. The alternative is ampicillin sulbactam combination. So this patient, the choice can be ampicillin sulbactam with gentamicin. But remember, this is also a patient who has got CLD and is at a risk for nephrotoxicity. So this particular patient was treated with the double beta-lactam strategy of ampicillin sulbactam with ceftriaxone. And in fact, this has a huge reduction in the healthcare cost as well. So in fact, infective endocarditis can be a low hanging fruit for antimicrobial stewardship programs. And this was data which we had presented in SIDSCON as a poster, where the red bars indicate the antibiotics prior to the ID consultation, and the blue bars indicate antibiotics after the ID consultation. And as we can see here, there was de-escalation of antibiotics. The meropenem as well as the vancomycin teicoplanin were discontinued after in close to 12 patients, and there was an increase in the use of the other beta-lactam agents. Now, there are certain novel approaches to therapy as well, and this is one of the landmark POET study which was published in NAGM regarding the oral therapy in infective endocarditis. And here, this was performed in case of left-sided endocarditis, which were uncomplicated, and IV therapy was given for at least 10 days, following which a switch to oral therapy was performed. And as we can see, the oral treatment subsequently was non-inferior to the IV therapy. So this can also be a very good treatment option once in case there is a difficult venous access, and if for uncomplicated cases, and if the patient has responded dramatically with the antibiotics. Now, coming to the surgical indications, which in fact are very important. In fact, endocarditis should be considered as a surgical disease rather than a medical disease, as Dr. Soman always says that. So this is a patient who had presented with diabetes, and he had a stroke. Then subsequently, he was admitted recently in Medanta with severe MR. The MRI brain showed that there was an acute infarct, and it also showed that there was an aneurysm in the right MCA. The TEE was done, which showed an oscillating mass attached to the AML with severe MR. Along with this, the CT angio was done, as well as subsequently a neck DSA was done, which showed that there was a mycotic aneurysm, and there was bilateral luminal narrowing suggestive of vasculitis. This patient had a WBC count of just 9,000, not leukocytosis. The CRP was elevated, and he was started already on cefoperazone sulbactam. Along with there was a clinical response. So the ID reference was sought, and he had some dental caries as well. So the antibiotics, because the patient had a clinical response, and then again this patient, the likely organisms become VGS. Enterococci is less likely as the patient is responding to cefoperazone sulbactam, which does not cover Enterococcus. So this patient was initiated on ceftriaxone and gentamicin. The neurosurgery team performed the coiling for the aneurysm during the course of therapy. This patient received antibiotics with ceftriaxone for 4 weeks and gentamicin for 2 weeks. Traditionally, otherwise for culture negative, it would be ampli-genta combination for a total duration of 6 weeks, but the treatment has to be individualized. The patient has been responding to the ceftriaxone gentamicin combination, and hence the treatment was continued, making the possibility of either it's a VGS which is susceptible or relatively resistant, but definitely not a resistant VGS, and also a nutritionally variant streptococci is a possibility. So later on, the patient underwent MV repair. Infective endocarditis, there are several surgery needs to be considered as per related to the vegetation, valvular dysfunction, as well as the perivalvular extension or the complications. And even if the patient is having persistent fever or bacteremia, despite 5 to 7 days of antibiotic therapy, which is appropriate, then also surgery needs to be considered. And an early surgery is associated with a lower mortality in patients with heart failure as well as paravalvular complications, but also early surgery has been associated with a significant good outcome in patients without heart failure with a larger vegetation as well. As we can see here, the probability of death is much lower with the early surgery as compared to the conventional treatment. So for endocarditis, it's a multidisciplinary approach, which is important, including the various specialties, cardiologists, ID physicians, as well as microbiology, neurologists, as well as the cardiac surgeons. Coming to the prophylaxis, patients who have had prior culture negative endocarditis should receive antibiotic prophylaxis as well. If there is as this is one of the indications for giving the prophylaxis. So to summarize, culture negative infective endocarditis comprises a significant proportion of infective endocarditis. Most common cause of culture negative IE is Streptococcus species in patients with prior antibiotic exposure, and then the possibility of fastidious organisms. Imaging as well as molecular assays are useful in the diagnosis. Identifying organisms based on the clinical presentation, risk factors, previous antibiotic exposure is key for clue to the possible etiology. And surgery, whenever indicated, helps in improving the outcome for this fascinating infectious diseases syndrome. Thank you so much.